Namaste and welcome to Daily News Simplified, the what, why, and how of newspaper reading.
Now we would be analyzing the Delhi edition of the Hindu newspaper of 15th of June 2019, and the news that will be covered today is given on the screen, and the timestamp for the same is given in the description and the comment section given below. And so now with this, let us start with the first article. Now we have taken the lead editorial from the editorial page on page 10. Now this editorial is first related to the concept of sustainable development. Now in the simplest of terms, sustainable development means that the economic development needs of the current generation would be undertaken or carried out without compromising the ability to meet the environmental and the economic needs of the future generation. Now, a simple example of this is that let's say for our current electricity generation, we require coal, but it does not mean that we'll mine the entire coal deposits within India so that we're able to fulfill our own electricity generation requirements. Whereby what generally happens in every country, that every natural resource that the country has is used in a sustainable manner by every generation, so that the future generations that may come after them are also able to undertake the benefits of the natural resources of a country. And it is within that context that all the gold deposit or the lithium deposit or petroleum deposit or deposits of any natural resources within any country are not mined and extracted by one particular generation. And therefore, it is within that context that the economic development needs of any particular generation needs to be undertaken without compromising the environmental and the economic needs of the future generations. Now, this concept of sustainable development has been further asserted by the Supreme Court of India in the Vellore Citizen Welfare Forum case of 1996, whereby the Supreme Court within this case has said that sustainable development is intrinsic to India's constitutional structure. However, it needs to be understood that it has been difficult to implement the concept of sustainable development in practice within India. Whereby, with regards to sustainable development, what has happened in India is that a balance has been tried to be maintained between the environment and between economic development projects. However, what has happened mostly in India is that in most of the cases, the balance has been tilted towards economic development projects rather than protecting the environment. So now, according to the author, what happens is that if a development project within India depletes groundwater or increases pollution but is able to create jobs, the development project is undertaken within India, whereby it is considered that the current and even future generations would prefer a better economy that produces jobs through the development projects rather than cleaner air or easier access to drinking water. Whereby what has happened is that development projects are being undertaken within the state of Gujarat, in which industries have been formed which have been polluting the groundwater with arsenic. And similarly, projects have been undertaken within the state of Haryana and Rajasthan, in particular illegal mining of the Aravalli Hills, which has been depleting the forest cover of the Aravalli range. Similarly, infrastructure projects have been undertaken in the Western Ghats within the state of Kerala, which has now been depleting the flora and fauna of the Western Ghats. And it is within that context that the author has said that sustainable development within India is difficult to be implemented within practice, whereby the balance has been tilted towards development projects rather than protecting the environment. Now, it is within that context that the author has highlighted the recent judgment of the Madras High Court in the P.V. Krishnamurthy versus the Government of India case. Now, what had happened is that an 8-lane expressway was proposed between Chennai to Salem, and this project of constructing an 8-lane highway from Chennai to Salem was being undertaken by the National Highway Authority of India. But what has happened is that the Madras High Court quashed the various notifications that were given out by the National Highway Authority of India with regards to the proposed highway from Chennai to Salem. Now, the Madras High Court has raised several questions about the procedure which is being followed with regards to environmental impact assessments for development projects. Now, the Madras High Court has raised several concerns over the environmental impact of the project with regards to cutting down of trees, poaching of animals, fragmenting forest land, and apart from other environmental concerns that have been raised with regards to the proposed 8-lane highway from Chennai to Salem. Whereby what would happen with regards to the construction of this highway is that several trees from forest areas would be cut down. The road may further lead to poaching of animals that are located within the forested areas. Apart from this, the forested areas would also be fragmented. and therefore the Madras High Court turned down the notifications that were issued by the National Highway Authority of India, whereby the procedure for the environmental impact assessment for this development project was not being properly carried out. Now, the author has highlighted an important example from the Madras High Court judgment, whereby the example is with regards to environmental clearance for acquisition of land. Now, according to the Government of India, there is no law mandating an environmental impact assessment to be carried out before efforts are made to acquire private land. Now, what you need to know is that the Environmental Protection Rules of 1986 requires that an environmental impact assessment needs to be carried out for construction of a new highway. However, according to the Government of India, the Environment Protection Rules of 1986 does not mention that environmental impact assessments needs to be carried out when acquiring private land for construction of highways. Now, it is within that context that the author has said that the judgment of the Madras High Court in P. Krishnamurthy case is well reasoned, whereby this judgment of the Madras High Court tilts the balance with regards to sustainable development back to the concept of protecting the environment. So now hopefully up till here you've understood on how the Madras High Court judgment within the P.V. Krishnamurthy case has tilted the balance towards environmental protection. And it is within that context that the author has said that this judgment of the Madras High Court has reversed the scale of priorities, whereby it has reversed the priority of the government with regards to sustainable development from economic development projects towards protecting the environment. However, what you also need to know is that this judgment of the Madras High Court has been challenged within the Supreme Court. Therefore, you have to understand that this case is currently within the purview of the Supreme Court, and this news, therefore, should be considered news in transition. Therefore, let us wait and see as to what would be the response of the Supreme Court with regards to the Madras High Court judgment within the P.V. Krishnamurthy case. So now hopefully up till here you've understood as to what is sustainable development and what has been the main purview of the Madras High Court judgment within the P.V. Krishnamurthy case. Now this editorial and the explanation given in this section should be seen from the perspective of GS Paper 3 within the section Environment. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now I have taken this editorial from the editorial page on page 10. Now what this editorial highlights is that SEBI, or the Securities and Exchange Board of India, which is the regulator for credit rating agencies within India, has issued various guidelines so as to improve the framework of credit rating agencies. Now in the month of November of 2018, SEBI had issued guidelines with regards to credit rating agencies so as to improve their financial disclosures. Now this editorial, which had appeared in the Daily News Simplified video of 15th of November 2018, was also titled Full Disclosure. Now to understand today's editorial, you need to first understand as to what is a credit rating agencies and what were the guidelines which were issued by SEBI in the month of November of 2018. And it is after that we'll try to understand today's editorial with regards to the new guidelines which has been issued by SEBI with regards to credit rating agencies. Now what I'll do is attach this section on full disclosure from the Daily News Simplified video of 15th of November, which will allow you to get an understanding of the various guidelines which was issued by SEBI in the month of November of 2018. And after that we'll try to understand what today's editorial talks about with regards to the recent guidelines which has been issued by SEBI with regards to credit rating agencies. Now what this article talks about is that recently the Securities and Exchange Board of India, or SEBI, has released various disclosure norms for credit rating agencies. Now these guidelines have been issued by SEBI so as to improve the quality of disclosures that are made by credit rating agencies. However, before understanding as to what this editorial talks about, the first thing that you need to understand is what is credit rating and what is a credit rating agency. Now according to SEBI, or the Securities and Exchange Board of India, credit ratings is an assessment that provides the probability of default on a payment either in the form of interest or in the principal amount on a debt instrument. Now the first thing is, a debt instrument can be in the form of a bond, a commercial paper, treasury bills, fixed deposit, and other type of debt financial instruments. So it can be considered that a debt instrument represents a contract whereby one party lends money to another party. So let's say there's a bank called A and there's a company called Z, and this company Z wants to raise money, and therefore to raise money it issues various bonds in the capital market. Now these bonds are then purchased by a bank called A. Now when this bank A purchases the bond from this company Z, this bank then effectively lends money to this company Z, and therefore now this company Z would now have to pay interest to the bank A, apart from also paying the principal amount, and therefore this bond would now be known as a form of a debt instrument. Now, as you already might be aware of, credit ratings are generally given in the form of A plus, A plus plus, and other forms of grades. Now, what a credit rating agency would do is to provide a credit rating for this particular bond. And now, what this credit rating would signify is the probability of default on payment of interest or the principal by the company Z. So, if there is a high chance that this company Z may not be able to pay the interest or the principal amount back to the bank A, then the credit rating for this particular bond would be low. However, if the probability that this company Z would be able to pay back the principal and the interest, then the credit rating for this particular bond would be high. And so, therefore, a credit rating is an assessment which is provided by a credit rating agency as to what is the probability that a company, bank, the government, or any other entity may default on the payment of interest and principal on the money that the entity has borrowed through a debt instrument. And so, therefore, a credit rating agency assesses the ability and the willingness of the issuer company, as in the company which has given out the bond or the commercial paper or any other form of debt instrument, and whether that company would be able to pay the interest and the principal amount on that particular debt instrument. So, therefore, a particular company called Z would issue a particular type of a debt instrument, such as a bond or a commercial paper, and then this bond, which is a debt instrument, is then purchased by a bank called A. And therefore, when this bank A purchases the particular bond that has been given out by company Z, the bank A effectively lends money to the company Z. And now, this company Z, which has borrowed money from the bank A by issuing a bond, now has to pay back interest and the principal amount back to the bank A. And now this is where a credit rating agency comes in, wherein the credit rating agency assesses the debt instrument, which in this case is a bond, as to whether this company Z would be able to pay back the principal and the interest which this company Z has borrowed through the issuing of this bond. So if the company Z is able to pay the interest plus the principal amount on the bond that it has issued, then this particular bond would have a high rating. However, if this company Z is not able to pay the interest or the principal amount on this particular bond that it has issued, then the credit rating agency would give a low credit rating to this bond. So now hopefully you've understood the whole process of a credit rating. And based on that, I want to ask you a question whether the issuer company is rated by a credit rating agency or the instrument. So, whether it is the company Z which is being rated by the credit rating agency, or whether it is the debt instrument which this company Z has issued to the market. Now, the answer to this question has been explained in the explanation just given. Now, according to SEBI, or the Securities and Exchange Board of India, the rating which is given out by a credit rating agency is assigned to the security or the debt instrument, and therefore a rating given by a credit rating agency is not given to the issuer company but to the security or the debt instrument which has been issued by a particular company, and therefore the rating would not be given to the company Z but rather to the bond which this company Z has issued. So now hopefully you've understood as to what is credit rating and what is a credit rating agency. Now let us understand the main disclosure norms which has been issued by SEBI for credit rating agencies. Now this article has highlighted two main norms. First, that the credit rating agencies would be required to inform the investors of the liquidity situation of the rated company, wherein the credit rating agency would inform the investors with regards to the cash balance, the liquidity coverage ratio, asset liability mismatch, and other forms of liquidity situation of a rated company. And the second main norm, which has been highlighted in the article, the credit rating agencies would also have to provide the historical rating track record of a particular rated company. So now let's say for an example, the company Z has issued a bond, and upon this bond, the credit rating agencies would be rating. Now under the new norms which has been prescribed by the Securities and Exchange Board of India or SEBI, when the credit rating agencies are providing ratings to this particular bond, they would also have to provide the liquidity situation of the company Z in the form of its cash balance, its asset liability mismatch, liquidity coverage ratio, and other forms of liquidity situation. Now let's say this company Z had also issued a debt instrument in the past, And this particular credit rating agency had also provided a rating with regards to this debt instrument. And therefore, according to the new norms given by SEBI, the credit rating agency would now also have to provide the information of the various ratings that the credit rating agency has given to the earlier debt instruments which were issued by the company Z. And therefore, the credit rating agency would provide a historical rating track record for this company Z, wherein this information then can be used by investors who intend to purchase bonds or other debt instruments of this company Z. And therefore, by providing information with regards to both of these aspects, investors who intend to lend money to this company Z on any particular debt instrument would be able to make an informed decision. Now, apart from this, the editorial highlights various issues or concerns with regards to the monitoring or the regulation of credit rating agencies. Now, the first concern raised in the article is with regards to the issuer's pay model. Wherein what happens under the issuer's pay model is that a particular company Z would pay a credit rating agency to rate a particular debt instrument which has been issued by the company Z. And what the article is trying to highlight is that it creates a conflict of interest for the credit rating agency. And therefore, according to the article, SEBI should take measures to resolve this issue. The second concern raised in the article is of the high barriers for new players to enter as a credit rating agency. Now, what the article is trying to highlight is that there is a small number of credit rating agencies in India, and SEBI has put up a lot of barriers for new companies to become credit rating agencies. And what this has done is stifle competition, wherein investors are not provided with a sufficient number of alternative credit rating providers, and thereby leads to low quality standards of the established credit rating agencies. And the third and the last concern raised in the article is that the current model of credit rating agencies favors borrowers above investors. Wherein, as you already understand the issuer's pay model, so it is the company Z which wants to borrow money from the market, which pays the credit rating agency to rate a particular debt instrument which this company Z has issued. Apart from this, there is also high barriers for new players to enter as credit rating agencies. And therefore, what the article is trying to highlight is that the current system favors the borrowers or the companies that want to borrow money rather than the investors whose money actually should be protected. So now hopefully you've also understood the crux of this article. So now after understanding the editorial titled Full Disclosure of Daily News Simplified video of 15th of November, let us understand today's editorial which is also titled Full Disclosure with regards to SEBI's new guidelines with regards to credit rating agencies. Now again the focus of today's editorial is with regards to the recent guidelines issued by SEBI so as to improve the quality of disclosures which has been made by credit rating agencies. Now, the first main guideline is that the credit rating agencies would now be required to provide a rationale for the rating, whereby if the credit rating agency has given a rating of A++ to any particular bond or any other particular debt instrument, then they have to provide a reason as to why they have given such a rating. Now, an important guideline given by SEBI is that the disclosure of probability of default by the companies has been made mandatory for all credit rating agencies. So now let's say the company Z has given out a particular bond and a particular credit rating agency has provided a rating for this particular bond. Now this credit rating agency would also have to provide the probability of default by company Z on this particular bond. The third main guideline given out by SEBI is that the credit rating agencies have also been asked to disclose all sensitive factors which could possibly trigger a change with regards to their rating. So let's say for this particular bond B, which has been given out by company Z, a credit rating agency has provided a rating. Now apart from this credit rating agency would also have to disclose all the sensitive factors, such as whether this bond is high risk or not, or whether the company which has given out by this bond has sufficient funds or not. And similarly, every other sensitive factors which could possibly trigger a change with regards to a rating for this particular bond has to be disclosed by a credit rating agency. The fourth guideline is with regards to improving the transparency of the ratings that have been given out. Now, as you already understand, the credit rating agency have to disclose all the sensitive factors which could possibly trigger a change in credit ratings. And it is within that regard that they have been asked to disclose all the liquidity related parameters such as the access to credit for that particular company, the liquidity coverage ratio for that particular company, whether that company has adequate cash flows, and apart from other sensitive factors relating to liquidity. The fourth guideline given out by SEBI is that the adequacy of the liquidity for that particular company has to be denoted in terms of standard terminologies. Whereby what is currently happening is that there might be several credit rating agencies which give out rating based on their own personal parameters. Therefore, to avoid the problem of ambiguity and personal parameters given out by credit rating agency, SEBI has said that standard terminologies such as superior, adequate, stretched, and poor would have to be used with regards to giving out information with regards to liquidity of a particular company. Now, the fifth and the last main guideline given out by SEBI is that the credit rating agency must publish information on their performance in the rating of debt instruments, whereby this information on their performance has to be compared with a benchmark which would be created by SEBI. Now, these are the new guidelines which has been issued by SEBI with regards to improving the functioning of credit rating agencies. And these guidelines issued by SEBI should be seen in continuous to the guidelines which were initially introduced by SEBI in November of 2018. And therefore now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now I've taken the first article from page 1 and the second article from page 13. Now what both of these articles talk about is of the recent ongoing summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Now it is within that context that both of these articles first highlight the speech which has been given by Prime Minister Narendra Modi within the summit of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. The second aspect which both of these articles also highlight is that there would not be any form of meeting between India and Pakistan. Now what we're going to do in today's section is understand the various aspects which have been highlighted by Prime Minister Narendra Modi within his speech at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit. Now Prime Minister Narendra Modi has given out an acronym titled HEALTH. Now within this acronym, H stands for Healthcare Cooperation, E for Economic Cooperation, A for Alternate Energy, L for Literature and Culture, T for Terrorism-Free Society, and H for Humanitarian Cooperation. Now, according to Prime Minister Narendra Modi, this framework of health can act as a collaboration between the regional members of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Now, with regards to healthcare cooperation, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said that India can help with telemedicine and medical tourism. Now, with regards to the second aspect of economic cooperation, the Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said that India is against the principles of trade protectionism. The second point highlighted by Prime Minister Narendra Modi is that the World Trade Organization would remain the main focal point with regards to trade disputes and trade negotiation within the world. The third statement with regards to economic cooperation which has been made by Prime Minister Narendra Modi is that India is going to cooperate with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization members within the field of financial matters, digitization, and information and communication technologies. The third aspect is related to alternate energy, where Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said that India is going to advance the cause of producing and using more solar energy within India and across the world. Apart from this, with regards to Shanghai Cooperation Organization, a concept paper has been agreed upon with regards to cooperation within the field of environmental protection among the Shanghai Cooperation Organization members. The fourth aspect is of literature and culture, whereby India has said that it is going to translate the 10 great creations of Indian literature into every language of the member countries of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Now, an important focus of Prime Minister Narendra Modi with regards to his speech to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization was with regards to having a terrorism-free society, whereby Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said that countries which are responsible for aiding, supporting, and providing financial assistance to terrorists should be held accountable. Apart from this, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has also said that the RATS or the regional anti-terrorist structure of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization should be further strengthened. Now the sixth and the last concept which has been highlighted by Prime Minister Narendra Modi is of humanitarian cooperation, whereby Prime Minister Narendra Modi has said that India would be playing the role of a first responder in humanitarian cooperation and in disaster situations. Now what this means is, let's say a disaster has struck the country of Kyrgyzstan or Uzbekistan or Kazakhstan or any other member country of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, then India would be among the first countries to send aid, humanitarian assistance in the form of financial aid, individuals who are expert in disaster management, and apart from other aspects so as to minimize risk in disaster situations. Now these are the 6 main aspects which has been highlighted by Prime Minister Narendra Modi, which can act as a template for regional cooperation among the members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now we have taken this opinion-based editorial from page 13. Now, what this editorial highlights was that GM brinjal or genetically modified brinjal was found to be cultivated within a region of Haryana, whereby what has happened is that the cultivation of GM brinjal is banned within India, and therefore it has raised concerns whether this cultivation of GM brinjal within Haryana was a one-off case or whether this cultivation of GM brinjal is widespread across the country. Now, this editorial within itself highlights the various aspects with regards to the case of cultivation of GM brinjal within a particular region of Haryana. However, with regards to UPSC examination, the case in itself is not important, and therefore what we're going to do is understand various aspects with regards to GM brinjal itself. Now, what happens is that the production of brinjal is majorly affected or destroyed by two insects, first being the brinjal fruit and the second being the shoot borer. Now, to kill both of these insects from damaging the brinjal crop, conventional chemical pesticides are used. However, what happens is that the use of these chemical pesticides damage the environment and also affect the human health. And it was within that context that the BT brinjal was developed so as to combat the brinjal fruit and the shoot borer. Whereby what had happened was that BT brinjal was genetically modified, and therefore when the brinjal fruit or the shoot borer would eat this particular BT brinjal, it would cause a reaction within their digestive system and cause both of the insects to die. And therefore it was considered that BT brinjal was resistant to both of these insects. And by having this genetic property, it also minimized the use of chemical pesticides to kill both of these insects. Now Myco, which is India's largest seed company, had developed the first BT brinjal. But what had happened was that it was approved for commercialization in India in 2009. But its release was stopped by the Government of India, whereby the Government of India said that various tests needed to be conducted so as to see whether BT brinjal would be safe for humans or not. Now, from 2009 till today, the cultivation of BT brinjal continues to be illegal within India. However, irrespective of the fact that the cultivation of BT brinjal is illegal within India, it was approved for commercial release within the country of Bangladesh in 2013. Now, it has been considered that the availability of illegal seeds of BT brinjal and their cultivation, such as within the state of Haryana, was done by illegally importing the seeds from the country of Bangladesh. Now, within India, the application of biotechnology within the field of agriculture is dealt by three different ministries. First being the Ministry of Agriculture, the second being the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, and third being the Department of Biotechnology under the Ministry of Science and Technology. Now, within that regard, the development, cultivation, and transboundary movement of GM crops within India is regulated under the rules for manufacture, use, import, export, and storage of hazardous microorganisms, genetically engineered organisms or cells under the 1989 rules. Now, these 1989 rules have been formed under the Environmental Protection Act of 1986. Now, the 1989 rules, which has been formed under the Environment Protection Act, can also be known as the GMO rules of 1989. Now, the GMO rules of 1989 also cover all activities involved in research and development of products containing genetically modified organisms, including transgenic crops. Now, BT brinjal within itself is an example of a transgenic crop, whereby what happens is that a plant is taken which is then inserted with a gene from another organism. Now, the addition of this new gene changes the various characteristics of the original organism, and thereby it is considered as being genetically modified. Now, the third and the last aspect with regards to BT brinjal that you should know about is of Genetic Engineering Appraisal Committee. Now, this committee functions under the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Now, under the GMO rules of 1989, the Genetic Engineering Appraisal Committee is the apex body with regards to the usage of genetically modified organisms, whereby the committee is also responsible for the introduction or the release of genetically engineered organisms and products within India's environment. Now, it is the responsibility of the Genetic Engineering Appraisal Committee to find out on how BT brinjal is being illegally cultivated within India. Now, these are the main facts that you needed to understand with regards to GM brinjal. Now, previously a question has already been asked in the prelims examination of 2011 with regards to BT brinjal, wherever the question asked the objective of BT brinjal, and as you already understand, the correct answer would be A, to make it pest resistant. Now, hopefully you understood the basic aspects associated with GM brinjal or BT brinjal from the perspective of your UPSC examination. And so now with this, let us move on to the next article. Now, we have taken this article from page 1. Now, as you already understand, the US government has imposed various tariffs with regards to import of Indian steel and aluminium. Now, apart from this, what has also happened is that the US has withdrawn the export incentives that it used to give to India under the Generalized System of Preferences or its GSP program. Now, when in March of 2018, when the United States imposed various tariffs on India, India also imposed duties on various products of the United States that were being imported within India in June of 2018. However, what used to happen afterwards was that India and the United States were engaged in negotiations. And within that context, what India would continue to do is extend the deadline for the imposition of Indian duties on US imports. So let's say in June of 2018, India had said that it would impose duties on US products from October of 2018. However, when the date would come in October of 2018, India would then extend the deadline to December of 2018. And similarly, when the date would come in December of 2018, India would again extend the deadline to February of 2019. And this extension of deadlines for the imposition of Indian duties on US import products continue to happen till date. However, what has happened now is that India has decided to impose tariffs on import of US products from 16th of June, meaning that the imposition of tariffs on several US goods which are being imported into India will start from tomorrow. Now, the imposition of tariffs from tomorrow would be done on US imports of walnut, chickpeas, Bengal gram, masoor dal, boric acid, and several various other products. Now, hopefully, up till here, you understood the main current context of this article. However, what is required for you to understand from this article is what is GSP or the Generalized System of Preferences. Now, the explanation with regards to Generalized System of Preferences has been covered comprehensively by Mangal sir within the Daily News Simplified video of 6th of March. Now, what you can do is that the link to this video is given in the description section given below, and you can refer to that DNS video to further understand about the GSP program. However, what we're going to do in today's section is understand about GSP through questions for practice. Now, there are two questions for practice, and what you need to do is pause this video, solve both of these questions, and wait for 5 seconds for the correct answer. Now, the correct answer to question number 1 is A. Differential treatment. Now, in simplest of terms, differential treatment is a policy of the World Trade Organization under which special and different favors are allowed to be given to developing countries, whereby under the GSP program of the United States, the import of products from developing countries such as India was given preference. Now, apart from this, you also need to understand that this generalized system of preferences is not related to zero-sum trade. Whereby what happens under zero-sum trade is that, let's say if I have imported $10,000 worth of products from the United States, then the United States would also need to import $10,000 worth of products from my country also. And therefore what would happen is that it would become a zero-sum trade. However, this is not one of the policy measures under the GSP program, whereby if the United States does import 10,000 worth of products from India under the GSP program, then it does not mean that India would need to import the same value of products from the United States. Now, import substitution means that the imports which a country is getting has to be replaced by domestic production. Now, what this means is that, let's say if India is importing aluminium or pulses or any other product, then under an import substitution program, India will ensure that its domestic production within aluminium, steel, pulses or any other product which is being imported becomes domestically manufactured within India only. Now, GSP is not an import substitution program, whereby if the United States does import several products from India and other developing countries, then it does not mean that the US is trying to ensure import substitution. And lastly, GSP is also not related to anti-dumping duty. Now, anti-dumping duty is basically a protectionist tariff. Now, within that context, the GSP program of the United States does not have any form of protectionist tariffs. Now, with regards to question number 2, the correct answer is D, 1, 2 and 3, whereby India was one of the largest beneficiary under the GSP program. Now, apart from this, the GSP program also boosted the American competitiveness. And apart from this, an important fact about GSP that you need to know is that under the rules of the World Trade Organization, differential treatment is allowed to be given to developing countries. And therefore, GSP is an exemption from the most favored nation status as provided under the World Trade Organization. And apart from this, several countries such as Japan, United Kingdom, France and others also have a similar program as the GSP of the United States, whereby they allow imports from developing countries without any form of tariff. So hopefully with the aspects of both of these questions, you are able to understand further about the Generalized System of Preferences or the GSP program. And so now with this, let us move on to the next section. Now there are two more questions for your practice, and as you already understand, pause this video, solve both of these questions, and wait for 5 seconds for the correct answer. Now with regards to question number 3, the correct answer is B2 only, whereby the Genetic Engineering Appraisal Committee functions under the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. Now with regards to question number 4, the correct answer is A, 1 and 2, whereby the rating given out by credit rating agency is assigned to a security or an instrument, and similarly, they're also regulated by SEBI. However, according to SEBI, the rating which has been given out by a credit rating agency is not a recommendation to buy, sell or hold a debt instrument. Whereby according to SEBI, the rating which has been given out by a credit rating agency is only supposed to provide additional information to investors, and it is not a recommendation to either buy, sell or hold a debt instrument. And therefore within that regard, the correct answer is A, 1 and 2.
And now with this, we come to an end in the analysis of today's newspaper. Now we move on to the question for today.